Okay, welcome to a new Bible study series on John's Gospel. So here at St. John's, maybe it's appropriate that we're starting John's Gospel at St. John's for our new study this fall. But I would like to take a little bit of time to do some overview, at least at first, to lead us into a little bit better of the study. So the first thing you notice about John's Gospel, it's very different than what we call the Synoptic Gospels. So the Synoptics are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke they do tell the same story. They have the same template. And, Matthew and Luke add to that quite a bit with the birth narratives and some other teachings, some other parables that Jesus does. Mark is the shortest gospel, and you can see how Matthew and Luke add. But John's gospel is a completely different animal. John's gospel, especially, in fact, in the church, our seasons, our years follow one of those gospels for the whole year, Matthew, Mark, or Luke. But John doesn't have its own year. It's different enough, right? Usually John gets kind of put into the church year here and there. There's a lot of reasons for that. John is telling a far different story. Part of it, too, is that the timeline of when it was written, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, most scholars consider the book of Mark to be written first in about 50 AD or CE, if you're using those terms, Common Era or Anno Domini, about around 50. And then Matthew and Luke take Mark as a template, and they add a little bit later, like about 70 AD, CE. And then John comes later. So John, most consider it being written about the time of 100 CE or AD. And, John's community, John comes out of a different community. They believe he's one of the desert. There's a desert community, a little more withdrawn from the church that was forming in Jerusalem and other places. John's community was maybe a little more spiritual, if they consider that, out of the kind of the Essene tradition in Judaism, that those desert dwellers. So, it's different. It's a little more. People usually consider it a little more spiritual. That John's gospel has that feeling. Jesus talks more about the Spirit there. I always feel like when I'm reading Matthew, Mark, or Luke that I am hearing about Jesus or watching kind of a movie about Jesus or, the story about Jesus. When I read John's gospel, I always feel like I'm meeting Jesus and he's speaking to me. So I think that's a big part of what John is trying to evoke, that meeting him as you read the word. So hopefully we can meet Jesus as we read this word in John's gospel. Let's see. Some of the themes that I'd like to cover, I don't want to go into it too deeply because we'll pick them up as they come. But one of the big themes, there's some sevens in there, that big biblical number. Bible people love sevens, but there's what are called the seven signs, the seven miraculous signs, or the seven miracles. Usually they're translated signs or miraculous sign. And these seven are the turning water into wine, healing of the royal official son, the healing of the invalid at Bethesda, the feeding of the 5,000, the walking on the Sea of Galilee, restoring the sight of the blind man, the man born blind, raising of Lazarus, and then the large catch of fish at the end. So those are the seven miraculous signs. And then you have the seven I am statements, which is evoking that name that Moses heard from Yahweh in Exodus 3, when Moses says, what's your name? Who should I say sent me? God says, I am, right? This I am who I will be, what it's the grand statement, right? Yahweh, the holy name of God. So when Jesus says I am, he's really evoking that. And that shows up in seven major places, and then also shows up a few other ways that he uses that I am statement. But he says, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and I am the true vine. So those are the kind of 7 official I am statements, although there are more in John that we'll see as we go along. And then the last themes I want to touch on that we'll see over and over again is this light, really, Jesus is the light of the world, but using light and seeing the light is a theme that repeats many, many times. It's contrasted with darkness sometimes, but it's usually just, he speaks about the light. And seeing the light is equated with believing. So there's a lot of seeing, believing, and then also knowing, right? So these 3, seeing, believing, and knowing, are major themes that repeat in John's gospel. And because of the knowing, which is, we'll see how often that shows up, but sometimes John is called the Gnostic gospel because the Gnostics, or the gnosis, was kind of the special knowing, right? It kind of evokes a little bit of New Age spirituality in terms of this special knowledge that the traditional church has usually rejected in terms of the Gnostics and their writings. But there were Christian Gnostics of the time. And so John kind of is in between there from the more, what I would say, traditional Orthodox sense of things in the Synoptic Gospels, the Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then this, the writings of the Gnostics. John kind of fits in between there somewhere. So we'll see and hear some of that. And another big theme is the use of spirit. Jesus talks a lot about spirit, and also water. So spirit and water are also equated, like light and knowing, light and seeing. So some of the major themes in John's gospel, look for those. And we're going to kick it off with chapter 1, which is amazing, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? John starts it off big. In the Synoptic Gospels, you have a couple of birth stories where, Matthew has Jesus born and then fleeing to Egypt. Luke has the angels and the shepherds and all that fun stuff, and the star, right? Actually, Matthew has the star, the wise men following the star. But, those are kind of pretty human, concrete birth narratives. And John instead is going for something much bigger, right? John is going cosmic. And this cosmic sense of who God is and what God is doing. It's more about sort of this cosmic God spirit thing. And, maybe the other 3 are more about Jesus as a human being when God is incarnate that way. So another kind of spectrum of how do we look at Jesus. John's gospel is more on the kind of God, divine spirit side of things. But they all kind of fill in the picture. So we'll take a look at that. I think I'm probably gone long enough, about 8 minutes here for the overview. We'll get started on Monday, 9 o'clock, if you're watching this at St. John's in the Fireside Room. So I hope to see you there. Thank you.